Welcome to the Steel and Glory podcast, where we discuss the lively world of historical fencing and everything else related to the sword arts around the globe. And now, for today's instructor. In the short list of sword channels on YouTube, you'll find Michael Thomas and his brother Nick running the ever-popular Academy of Historical Fencing channel. I don't have the chops to ask for Michael's time, but he warmingly gave it anyway, especially right when I had started and didn't have anything produced at the time of his recording. Michael G. Thomas, he is a science fiction novelist from the United Kingdom. His best-selling Star Crusades series has sold in excess of 100,000 copies and continues to draw in new fans every month. As well as a strong interest in science fiction, Michael also writes horror fiction, including the popular Zombie Dawn trilogy, co-written by his brother Nick S. Thomas. As well as a prolific writer, Michael is also a well-known historical martial artist. He is the co-founder of the prestigious Academy of Historical Fencing and teaches traditional armed and unarmed European martial arts. His specialty areas are teaching the use of the medieval two-handed longsword and the German long knife. His academic background is as varied as his writing, with his first degree in computing and advanced degree in classical studies and more. He has studied in Newport, Bristol, and Bath, and is also a qualified secondary school teacher to boot. In recent years, he has undertaken substantial research in the fields of artificial intelligence, as well as Greek and Byzantine military history. My interview with Michael took place April 6th of 2023. I'm ever grateful to Michael for allowing me to have him as a guest, and we had a lot of fun. Ladies, gentlemen, I give you Michael G. Thomas.
Michael Thomas, welcome to the show.
Hi there. Thanks for having me on there. I really appreciate it.
Yes, you're welcome. So it's a great honor to have you on. Okay, so really quickly, first off, why historical fencing?
I suppose the thing with historical fencing is, I think children you have two types of children. You have the children that love swords and the children that don't love swords. And I think most children love swords. They love films with swords in. They love cartoons. They love reading books that have got swords in. So I think intrinsically a lot of people are really into swords anyway. In terms of what happened to me, and apart from generally being interested in swords, I started reenactment in the 90s. I think that's a route a lot of people took in sort of the early years of kind of modern HEMA. I started English Civil War reenacting, my brother as well, so the two of us, even though he's 10 years younger than me. So I turned up in my late teens, early 20s, and there was Nick, sort of 12 years old, holding a pike. Started reenactment in the early 90s, did that for a decade or so, until that kind of finally faded and we got into other things.
Can I ask you a quick question?
Of course.
What side were you on in the Civil War?
Royalist. I wanted to be royalist. I wanted to be royalist, but fortunately, we had to go for Parliament. The first regiment that we came across, as is probably historically realistic, the first regiment that came recruiting was the Parliamentarian Army. So we ended up joining the Roundheads. But we really wanted to be with the Royalists. But if we'd given it more than 30 seconds thought, we would have gone Royalist.
There you go.
But yeah, we joined up with that. So I started with the pike, moved up through musket. I remember my first sword fight was Old Sarum and Old Hill Fort, which would have been probably 1995, maybe 94. I just remember using a hanger for the first time, having no idea, just running at somebody, forward rolling over the top of them down a hill. And it sort of kind of went on from there until we stopped. And then we sort of didn't really do any fencing for a couple of years. I met my sort of partner, Pamela, and we were talking. She's really into Lord of the Rings, sort of really big into fantasy and sci-fi, talking about things we've done in the past. Swords came up. I thought, holy crap, why don't, excuse me, why don't
That's
we,
okay.
why don't we have a re-look at that? But rather than the reenactment part, why don't we just meet up and fight? So we made contact with some of our old friends from sort of our reenactment days, sort of booked a hall, bought some weapons, no armor, no masks, and just started sparring. So we started off with 6 people, me, my brother, Pamela, and 3 others. So we're sort of like the original 6. Started just hacking away. Eventually, somebody had the smart idea of introducing a fencing mask, so people, maybe lived.
Brilliant.
And it just sort of moved from there. It was private. Nobody didn't invite anybody, but a few people we knew wanted to join. We did that for about a year, and then in 2006, we decided to sort of go. I wouldn't say it's not professional, but to go public. So we came up with a name rather than just a generic name that we had for booking the hall, and basically put it out there if anybody wanted to join. We went to freshers at the college, got all the students for the first year, and off we went. So it was sort of a journey starting with sort of reenactment in the 90s, slight pause, and then deciding we want to get back to that because we really did like the fighting. When me and Nick were there, we were sort of musketeers, so we had all of our gear, had our file-up muskets, but we used to fire off our ammo as quickly as we could, so we could just go straight to the swords because we didn't really care about firing blank muskets at people. We wanted to hit them with steel. And if you can find, there are pictures. I've got a few of them. Of the 2 of us on the inside Chepstow Castle in about 1998, and there's the 2 of us on the battlement, and Nick's there with a sword in each hand. I'm there with my musket and about to draw my sword, and there's just any opportunity to start hacking and slashing with swords. And that's the sort of the origin, the very shortened version of the origin anyway.
I love it. That's fantastic. Man, I in a way I'm jealous because, man, I was just thinking, man, where was I in 1998? Where was I in 1999? And sword fighting.
You could never have found it. You could have got to your 60s or 70s. Well, you're not there yet, but you could. One day you'd be in your 60s or 70s, and you might see somebody. They might be talking about something that happened 10 miles away, or in American terms, maybe 100 miles away from where you are. That did this thing decades ago, and you didn't even know about it, and you completely missed it. Yeah. And if you did it back then, you probably wouldn't know, because we didn't have access to social media. For all of its sins, it's a great way of connecting with people that are interested in the same stuff as you. You could even post now on Facebook and say, "Oh, I wish I could use a sword like in Lord of the Rings," and somebody will probably type up and say, "Well, I saw this guy called Nate, and he's got this thing. He was talking about it." And you go and find out about it, and a week later you're going to be swinging a sword. So,
it's amazing, isn't it?
It is amazing.
Super powerful tool. Yeah, could you imagine, like in the 80s or 90s, that if someone described what social media was, wouldn't it seem magical?
I suppose, without actually seeing it, it would certainly seem magical. In the 80s, I often think you watch films. I remember back when I was a kid in the 80s, and I was a teenager. Teenager at the end of the 80s, and you think if you wanted to know anything, you had to go to a library and find out about stuff. But there was no way to get hold of this information, no way to communicate with the person in the town next to you that had the same interest in the same kind of swords as you. And unless you were in a club or something at a school, or you're in a sports club and you happen to go to another area and meet them, you'd never know. Maybe if it was on TV, you might see it occasionally, but that's it.
Right. And if it wasn't in your library, there was no way you would know about it unless you knew somebody who actually had that.
And even into the 90s, I remember in the 90s doing research. I don't remember what the research was for, but I remember having to go to Cardiff, which is our sort of local capital in Wales, going to Cardiff Library, where they had all of the indexes for the internet. So back then, before the search engines, before even sort of stuff like Alta Vista and Yahoo, or whatever search engine of choice you were using, there was no search engine that people were using. So if you wanted to go and find out about a company in the US somewhere, you had to go to the library, find an index or a catalogue of websites, write them all down in your book, and then go home and then sort of log on to whatever BBS you were going to try and use, and try and connect to a website. So probably using Telnet to get there or something. Oh, an absolute pain in the backside. And of course, printed material, ridiculous. It's out of date the minute it was put to paper.
Yep.
So yeah, no way of finding out. And that's only why we were able to start in the early 2000s. Is because we could reach out and contact people that we already knew.
Mm-hmm.
That there still wasn't a network, so we couldn't just put a message out to say anybody wanted to use a sword. And where would you put it?
Yeah, where would you put it?
No, it's crazy.
Taking that out in the paper, but that was so expensive. Like it didn't make any sense for a club to do that.
No, and a lot of clubs, ours included, don't run as a profit.
Mm-hmm.
We run as basically as an amateur club. We have our own jobs to do.
Mm-hmm.
So there's not like there's a huge pile of surplus money to spend on advertising.
No.
So yeah, you have no way of contacting people. So yeah, it makes a big difference, especially now. It's pretty epic.
Yeah, yeah. Well, that is a great story. That is so cool. We need to see some photos or something of you guys in the early years. Rabble rousing on the castle ramparts.
Oh, I do have some photos. I've got a photo of Nick on the beach at Burnham, which is in the west. I say the West Country. It doesn't mean anything, does it? The southwest of England, not far from Bristol. And we were doing a battle reenactment on the beach there, and they dug earthworks and bits, a bit like the fortification in Glory, Fort Wagner, you call it, don't you?
Yeah.
The Massachusetts regiment attacked.
Yeah.
And it looked very much like that. So they built huge earth ramparts on the beach, and there's a photo of Nick, and he must be about 12, maybe 13 or so, and he's standing in a breach in the sand defences. And he's got a lobster pot on that's way too big for him, so it hangs down to about here. And he's standing. I think he's standing there with a pike. I can't remember, but he's standing in the breach. And I think we were on opposite sides because I was supposed to be trying to get inside.
Yeah.
But yeah, we've got photos from back then. It's quite funny to see. And saying that, we still have some of the background somewhere. I don't know if you can see that sword. Yeah,
Yep.
that one there. That's the second sword I ever bought. So that's from I think 1996
Let's get a good view of this.
or 7. In fact, that's the sword I used in my very first sword fight.
Wow, that is.
Even thought about that, which is it's made by Armor Class actually.
That is cool. I bet you. I mean, we don't have the time today, but I bet you could tell a story of each of those swords, can't you?
Yeah, every one of them has a story, and they're just the ones that are left. We do tend to sell on any sword that we're not using, because our members are always after fresh swords, and you can't keep them all. When you get to 50 swords and you think, but I need more, and I've got more ordered now, and you just keep cycling them. You can't hang on to them. But there are some like my hanger there that it's an heirloom. The hilt is a bit ragged, but you think it'll be 30 years old quite soon, in a couple of years. But sword terms, it's not that old, but it's been in hundreds or thousands of fights.
Yeah, that's fantastic.
I will dig out some photos for you.
Yeah, that is so cool. You guys never grew up, did you?
And the really crazy thing, and it's a strange thing now, is everything is so well recorded now because we've all got digital devices on us.
Mm-hmm.
And back then, and it sounds like it's so long ago, I suppose it is. But sort of mid to late 90s, everybody was shooting on film. You only took photos if you intended on taking photos that day. You didn't just say, I'll just whip my 35mm out of my pocket and take a photo.
Mm-hmm.
So, our reenactment days, we were just lucky people took photos. And even the first years of of the AHF were so poorly sort of supplied with photographs because we were teaching, so we couldn't take the photos.
Yep.
And even then, few people didn't have digital cameras. And I had one in '98, which was really bad, a 1 megapixel digital camera. But yeah, the photographs weren't there. So there's a lot that wasn't recorded.
Oh well, memories.
Yeah, we'll be
Swords on the wall.
Yeah, swords on the wall. The ones that are left.
Fantastic. Well, Michael, let me switch gears really quick because you're a super prolific writer, and I mean, let me just read this here. And these are series. These aren't just one-offs, right? We've got Star Crusader, Star Crusades, Zombie Dawn, Star Legions, Star Cadets, Robot Commandos, Mech Legions, Cyber Commando, Strikers Commandos, Guardian War, Heroes of World War One, Night Hunter, War Masters, Void Wars. I mean, you have so many books, and I guess the most current season, the most current series is Void Wars. Is that correct?
It is, yes. It's the only one I've been working on for the last. I've been working on it for a year now. I think it's about a year. But yeah, there are quite a few. Most of them, I think probably half of them, are all part of the same sort of universe, which was my sort of Star Crusades series. That there is definitely the word star mentioned quite a bit there, but you don't want to make it too complicated. You need to make sure people know what it's about. It is a lot of books. To be honest, I'd like to write far fewer books, but it's one of those things that where people buy a book, they want a sequel. So you've got to keep putting them out. It's my full-time job, as is my brother as well. So we're both full-time writers. It's a family business. So there's 4 of us all together working on it, and we write a novel about every 2 months. So yeah, we are. I think it's 75 books I've done so far. But yeah, it is a lot. It is a lot. I think it's just under 6 million words. But I'm only on my second keyboard so far. So although the current one is wearing quite badly.
Yeah.
So we were given a good task. But yeah, it's the new series, Void Wars one, is the Void Wars bit actually is the least interesting bit of the whole book, because the name of the series is kind of generic, but the idea was the individual books would be much more interesting, and I wanted to combine. To be fair, there's a lot of World War One and World War Two elements in all kinds of sci-fi, and I've used them an awful lot myself.
Yeah.
But I thought with this new series, rather than kind of beating about the bush, I would actually just transpose World War Two into a sci-fi sort of setting, so that there are pre-built stories and characters and relatively famous people throughout the various events. And I thought I'd just recreate World War Two as a sci-fi series, and it was a bit of a risk, because the first book was a bit strange. You know, it's got Bismarck on the title, on the cover, and a huge ship that's supposed to be the Bismarck. Well, it's supposed to be. It is the Bismarck, and it's a little close to another series in terms of sort of style and naming. But yeah, it proved really popular. I was very happy with it. I didn't start at the start of the war, mainly because I wanted something that would grab people's attention. So you need a kind of a big event, and loads of people have heard of the Bismarck. It's a sort of an infamous ship. Well, infamous to us anyway, but anybody else, it's a name a lot of people know about.
Yeah.
So I did that one as the first book, and the whole book is just literally about the first operation of the Bismarck, which I'm glad to say was the last. Spoiler, by the way, sorry.
Well, if you know your history, it's kind of not really a spoiler. But see, what's really interesting is that just the overlay, right, of something like that you do. It's like, if you know history, you kind of know what's going to happen anyway, but it's really fun to see what you do with it.
Yeah, you can fiddle around the edges. The basic plot elements need to stay. Strangely, one of our ancestors served aboard the Hood, which was sunk by the Bismarck. But he wasn't. Thankfully, he wasn't aboard while it was engaged, which is good news. Good for me, anyway. But but it's an interesting side note. We got a postcard that he sent in the late 20s when he was serving on the Hood. It was a big, prestigious role back then. But yeah, it is an interesting thing, and I've had a lot of people contact me afterwards, and they said they really enjoyed the detail, because I've tried to keep it where there is detail that's interesting to the story. I've tried to keep it as much as possible, so names, even sort of designations of aircraft, anything sort of recorded sort of radio message wise that's interesting to the story. Try to reuse as much as possible. But I had to throw in a few other tidbits, such as like the last engagement with the Bismarck, which, just a spoiler alert before I say anything, just in case you don't know what happened back then. But I basically embellished the last the last engagement with the Bismarck, because having a crippled ship circling around it and blasting it to pieces, it's good for the Royal Navy, but it's not the best ending. So I threw in a few extra ships, just padded it out a little bit more. just to jazz it up a bit. Which, to be fair, any film that's made about a historical event is probably changed significantly more than I did.
Oh yeah.
Even though mine is turned into a giant spaceship. So yeah, I did try and keep it as close as possible. I finished the Pearl Harbor novel. It came out, I think, last month. And I followed the story as close as I could there. Did a load of research. Really interested with the Japanese spies in Hawaii. I didn't even know anything about the Japanese spies there, and that's a really interesting sub story in itself. So yeah, I included all of that, all the kind of the all the naughtiness of scooping around, sort of Ford Island and the rest. I put all the details in. There's a number of sort of the quite famous, okay, more than quite famous, very famous sort of Americans that were involved. But yeah, just tried to put in as much as I could so people know, as you say, people that know the story will be reading it and they'll be waiting. They'll be thinking like, they've got a particular battleship, they know what happens to it, but they also know some of the details, some of the characters, some of the events that happen to it, and they're kind of the waiting to see. So I try and include as many as I can without it just being regurgitating all of the details one after the other.
Yeah. No, I do. I think that's super clever. And it's cool. And when people figure that out, it's how do I say this? History is important to pass on to the next generation, right? And so if you can make it into something that is interesting for them, right? Because on TV, there's, at least in the States, there's just endless documentaries, black and white, about World War II. And a lot of people are turned off, just like a lot of people are like, oh, great, another history about the Roman Empire. Well, I can eat it all up and that's fine. But for, some people, there's still things that they need to learn about that because they still affect us. And so anyway, yeah, no, I think that's a good thing that you're doing. And it's fun. And it's like, man, you mentioned Pearl Harbor, and as an American, I'm like, oh my gosh, I gotta, what did he say? What's going to happen? So it works. It works.
Yeah, it's a big event anyway for World War II. I appreciate it's a bigger event. Actually, I'd say it's a bigger event for Americans, but we were on the back. When I say we're on the back foot, way worse than the back foot. We were in dire straits. Yeah. Excuse me, let's get a drink. So yeah, big for Americans, but really big for us as well because we've actually got a friend in the fight, which until then we really did not. It was not looking very good. Which is an understatement. I appreciate.
I should say.
But yeah, it's. I know a lot of events are going to sort of hit people harder than others. And I'm doing the Battle of Moscow at the moment, and it's really weird doing the preliminary parts of the Battle of Moscow and all of the fighting going through Ukraine, Belarus, and all of the names that you're going through in the story are all the names that we've seen in the news over the last year. And it's really weird. You've got people fighting through towns, villages, cities, and rivers that we all know about now because we've been watching them on the news.
Yeah.
And it's really weird writing about it, I have to admit. Yeah, it is important stuff. I don't mean my books, but they are important, but more to me.
Of course they are.
But yeah, definitely. And also in terms of history and documentaries, most of them are so rubbish. The amount of World War II in color sort of for the third time, and it's the same regurgitated footage, and somebody getting really hyper and excited while they're describing what's happening. And you go and watch the Nidell documentaries instead about World War II and the Great War, and the detail and the research is so much better. I know going back to YouTube again, but you can find such good content on YouTube. Way better than traditional documentaries, as long as you can find a good source. But yeah, there's some outstanding documentaries. I know Nick, go back to my brother, he's doing a sort of Napoleonic series at the moment that's going really nicely. In fact, that sounds like a really dodgy sort of ad for his books.
No, it's fine.
But I know with his research, he does loads and loads of traditional research. He's got heaps of books, and it's his subject. It's the thing he teaches in HEMA. But the minute he gets to a particular event, so something in particular happens in Portugal, you'll be straight on the documentaries, watching them on YouTube, and there's half a dozen sources that just write exceptionally good documentaries, and they're just a great source.
Yeah, well, I see. So the YouTube channel, right? Nick seems to be, or at least I don't know, in my feed for whatever reason, Nick seems to be the front man. and you could tell he's very passionate about the Napoleonic era, and he makes that 1796 saber look really good.
You want to buy one of those, yeah?
Well, I kind of have a similar thing. You know, I got the D guard and all that.
It's a really nice sword. And Nick's got quite a collection of 70. Oh, I think he's probably got them in the video of his sort of personal collection. But that new sharp, that is a really nice piece.
Mm-hmm.
You know, apart from the kind of the manufacturer's marking just on the fort on the blade, apart from that, and you wouldn't really be able to tell. So it's just as well they put the marking on it, to be honest. But so, yeah, they are.
Yeah.
It's a really nice piece.
Yeah, no, it looks really good, and you know, just kind of getting back to some of his writings about that subject, you can tell that he's very, very passionate about it. So, I mean, who else to read about, you know, that era in a kind of a fun.
He's sort of gone for historical fiction, and then put in, you know, sort of a flamboyant fencer. So it's a good opportunity to throw in sort of period weaponry, period training and sparring. So he's got all of that as much as humanly possible with the historical story. And that's going really well because we were both working on the same kind of stuff before. We were working on the sort of horror and science fiction.
It's like Hema catnip.
Yeah, well, it's difficult because we've done sort of sword-related novels, both of us, before, and they just haven't really caught on. And I did one called Masters of Defense last year or the year before, which I thought would really catch on with the HEMA community, and it fell quite flat.
Not so much. That's weird.
Which was basically it was like a zombie apocalypse story at a big HEMA event. Which you think when you go to a HEMA event, almost everyone I've been to abroad. So when we've gone to Vienna, and you're sat with a load of Austrians and Germans and loads of other people, and everybody's been drinking all night. And almost always, they would love the opportunity to draw their swords and fight a horde of zombies coming into a big hall being used for an event. But yet the book they didn't seem quite so excited about. So which is why you just can never tell. So we keep experimenting with new series. I did this new World War II one. Nick did his Napoleonic one. And they both seem to have resonated. Well, not they seem to. They have resonated with kind of readers, and they're going for them.
Yeah. Well, good. That's weird. Everyone likes a good zombie apocalypse. You know, so I've been meaning to ask you. It's really because I thought maybe at one point in my life I wanted to be an author, and maybe I'll do that later. But what I discovered is I just don't have the patience to make the words look good and flow. And so one of the things is how do you write a fight, right? So a sword fight, how do you, like, knowing what you know, how do you write that in a way that's interesting for a reader, especially one who may not understand the mechanics of a sword fight? Like,
I think the first thing you've got to remember, if you think of any good fight scene in a film that you've seen, a really, really good one, is the actual fighting part is probably the least important part of it.
Yes.
And I always say when people ask me about really good fight scenes, which is a slight digression, but I go for something like the fights with Vader and Luke in Empire Strikes Back. And the actual fighting is fine. The choreography is decent enough, but there's emotion and drama for the scene. So you've got the father and the son. And you can see the
storyteller right there. That's so absolutely true. I agree with you 100%.
But the son is utterly outclassed. You can see Luke has no chance. And it's only when Vader gets enraged, and you can see he kind of lets rip, and he's really hammering down, rips his arm off and then stops. But so the whole scene is epic, much like the one in Return of the Jedi as well, similar kind of scene. But the actual fighting, it's relatively straightforward. And in terms of describing the fight, the cuts are not that complicated, relatively simple cuts and parries. But there's the dialogue, the music, the structure of basically the movement around the location. The way that kind of Luke is being forced sort of through the base. So he's basically giving up ground continually. Every time he tries to fight him, he just gets his backside kicked really hard. So that's all exciting. And you think, but there's no mention really there of what they're even doing with the swords, because it's not really that important. It's the choreography has to look good, but you say look at some of the prequel fights, which by 2023 standards are looking a lot better. But when they came out, there's some good choreography there. But where's the kind of the big emotional part of it? The big story bit. Now, even Darth Maul in his first fight, in the first proper fight where he dies, or he died in the film anyway. But in it, the fight's choreography is excellent, way better than any of the choreography in the original films. But there's no kind of big emotional thing. You don't know anything about Darth Maul. You don't really care about him. He's a bit of a nobody. Whereas the whole Luke and Vader thing, you find out there's a family connection. You can see that Vader doesn't want to kill him. He wants to, he's trying to control him. And you can see Luke is desperate to help his friends, but he's a kid. He doesn't really know what he's doing. He's given up on his training. He's a youngster. He's the person you put in the front rank. He runs in to fight, and he's probably going to die. And I think in terms of writing a good fight scene, that's the bit that comes first. I'm not saying that my fight scenes are like that. I try to make them like that. But in terms of writing a good fight, you need to get the kind of the themes and the emotion and the people. Are they scared? Are they confident? And you can think when you're sparring with somebody, there might be a little bit of apprehension, but you're never really going to have the fear. I hope you never will have the fear, because that's not why we do it. No. But there's not the fear or the connection or the consequences. So I think those are the important bits. And then with the sword, you can keep it really simple. You can have think of the old Kurosawa films. You can have a build-up that goes on for a minute, and then one guy steps in, and you effectively just Zornham straight in the face and kill him. Yeah, just draw the blade, slash straight down. Well, that's an epic sword fight, and there's a single cut. You could throw in a few more cuts. Maybe there'd be a parry. You come with another cut, another parry, and then you hit them. So you don't need a lot of cuts. And I think a lot of people get confused and say, I want to see a lot of I want to see more HEMA in films. And sort of you can use some elements from HEMA if it helps the story. But throwing in a 3-minute fight sequence with loads of HEMA moves, all you're doing there is a showcase for HEMA moves. There's anybody that thinks a fight that goes on for 3 minutes is probably missing the point of most fights. And most of the time, it's just a confused mess, and somebody dies and gets hurt quite quickly.
That's right. And that's the integral. I mean, that's kind of the problem, isn't it? Because with the real martial art, the idea is to subvert someone's idea of what you're going to do. You do it quickly, you do it powerfully, and you do it in a way that they don't expect. Well, physiologically, an audience sitting down, they can't see what's going to happen, because the person who is physiologically amped up, they can't see it either. So good HEMA will never look good in film, as far as I'm concerned. I mean, there's some tricks you could do, but the martial art will always be mysterious to people who don't do it. You can't just sit down and see it, because it's like, what just happened? Well, the guy who just ate it didn't know either.
Yeah, so that's going to say back to Nick's books. Then having a sequence where you're training some soldiers and using swords and they're sparring or something, well, then in that case, you can kind of describe the things that you're used to. So you can go with all the details, and then you can throw in some of those movements in the actual fighting scenes. And I've done loads of bits like that before. But when it comes to the actual fight, as I tell our students all of the time, you need to get really, really good at the really, really basic stuff. So if you've got good footwork, timing, and distance, and a really good cut one, if it's a military saber or a Zornhau, say, with most of the German stuff, that one cut and all the rest combined will be good enough against most people. You don't need all of the rest. The rest might be useful for the other 5 to 10% of the fights, but you need to get the basics working right. And working really well, just the same as with boxing. And if you've got footwork, timing, and distance, and a really good hook, you're not going to beat everybody. But that's if you have to come across an average boxer comes up at you, you will demolish them with the basics if you're really good at them. And I think with films as well, you can demonstrate the skills of a swordsman by not having to go through a 3-minute fight. So no, like a Scaramouche fight. It's great. But you can watch an entire episode, a TV episode. You can probably watch some of the shorter Mandalorian episodes, and Scaramouche fight would still be going on. It's impressive choreography, but it's utter nonsense when it comes to an actual sword fight. There's really not that much drama to it. Or the fights on the Cliffs of Insanity. You've got them fighting there, but it's the dialogue, it's the situation. The actual fighting's okay, but the whole scene is awesome, and the characters are awesome. The monologuing is excellent. The sword fight is kind of secondary to what is actually happening in the fight.
Yes. Yeah, the fight is the vehicle to show the virtue of each person.
Yeah, it's about them. It's about the characters. Otherwise, it's two stuntmen going at each other.
Right. It's the moment you learn that Inigo Montoya isn't really a villain. He's just kind of going along because he has a greater desire, which maybe is moralistic, right? He's going to avenge his father and, you know, like all this stuff, and he's dedicated his life to all the things that we all really empathize with. And
yeah, that's the story. You know, I think it's it's all conflict and character, which bizarrely kind of rotates me all the way back around with kind of the writing part. I suppose we are talking about writing to an extent anyway, but when at college, just after I finished at college, I sort of went into classics in a big way, and and looking at sort of old Greek drama, you can see again it's all about the characters and the situations, and all of that combines with, and if you want to combine that kind of detail with some fancy swordplay, can work really well. But without the characters and the scene setting and some kind of context, the sword fights they don't mean anything.
yeah, no, yeah, yes, I agree. Well, you said, you know, I'm not sure if you said Greek tragedy, but Greek story.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, so Greek drama, you know, tragedy is obviously quite a large part of it. There wasn't a huge amount of fighting, to be honest, in most of the comedy, but but the drama, it's all about these really, they're not necessarily particularly complicated characters, but they've got motivations and they've got relationships with the rest of the people in the stories.
Yeah.
And it's that kind of thing that is. I just got somebody coming in. I'm recording.
No worries. Well, yeah. So this is my way of humble bragging to say, like, so I read the Iliad, and the interesting, yeah. But you're right. The fighting, the actual fighting, that's a slog, and it's very detailed, and it's like, even for me, someone who's interested in that, it was really gross and disgusting. It just felt like, really, all these people.
It's really heavy. You think you've got sort of Achilles on sort of the beach, and he's fighting, and you've got sort of, and often they're throwing rocks at each other. But then when they get to sort of their spear work, and they're describing, you know, the spear piercing their shields and piercing different parts of the body. Yeah, it is really graphic, actually.
It's very graphic.
Yeah, very. And you think the characters are all larger than life, and intentionally so. And memorable, you know, they have stood the test of time.
Yeah.
But yeah, the fighting part is definitely not the thing that sticks in your mind as the most important part of that.
No, it's the brotherhood. It's talking about, and this person did this, and their relationship is this, and they go out and they're known for this part, and you know, that's the interesting thing. Like all the, like you say, all the people who are larger than life. It's that those relationships, their motivations, what they're doing there, what the relationships are. I said that 3 times already, but yeah, that's the key. That's what makes it interesting.
Yeah, definitely. And Iliad, great. I used to carry a copy of the Iliad in my bag when I was at school. Unfortunately, my ink pot, which sounds really old, I just happened to use an ink pot, but it broke in my bag and spilled. It was the Alexander Pope, sort of the poetic version of the Iliad. Really nice 1898 version. I used to have in my bag, and the ink pot leaked blue ink all the way in my bag and all over the book. So all the pages are stained with blue ink now, which really sucks. It's really good book. Yeah, but it is a great book. It's and the characters in it, they're really good archetypes to use for people. You know, there's so much detail on them, and the bitterness and the rivalry. And I did kind of pinch a lot of the elements from that. I did another historical series called.
I think you're in good company about that.
Yeah, I just got to remember which series it is now. Yeah. Wait, it's not like I haven't done it before. I did another sci-fi series that was based on Xenophon and the 10,000 Mercenaries, that's what I did my thesis on, was on the Anabasis. But I thought I'd do a sci-fi series called Star Legions, which originally called the Black Legion, but Games Workshop sort of be using Black Legion quite a bit, so I changed it just to make sure there were no imperial entanglements. So I got rid of that, went for Star Legions, but that was very much the story of the 10,000, sort of going into Persia, trying to depose the king. So I included loads of historical sort of fighting in that. So I put a few conceits in there so that they'd have to be able to fight in hand-to-hand combat. In a similar way to Star Wars has conceits so that they use lightsabers, so you can have sword fights. Otherwise, they just use blasters all the time. So I had a few conceits. So they were using shields, not Dune-type shields, but so they were using shields that worked much like an Aspis shield. And then they had weaponry that they could use in a similar fashion to spears. And then I could take lots of elements from the Iliad and all of the details from the Anabasis as well, which is a really good story.
Yeah, that's fantastic.
Yeah, it's a really good story. And then I did a sequel to it as well, the spin-off, because there's always a spin-off, which was set immediately afterwards, which was the kind of the rise of Sparta throughout Persia. And that is actually an incomplete series. There's one more book to go on that.
Oh, wow.
But World War II has taken over, so that's on the back burner.
Yeah, well, World War II takes over everything.
It's true. It is true. You've got to write what people want to read.
Yeah, that's it. I mean, if you're making money, you got to give people what they want, right?
Yeah, that's ultimately people say, why do you write? And it's sort of, well, why do you work? Because I like to eat meat and I like to live in a house. So in which case I have to work. Although I'm quite lucky, and at least I get to do something I enjoy, which a lot of people don't have. Yeah, a lot of people don't have that luxury. But it does mean, I do have to churn the words out. It's every day is at least 3,000 words. I know people out there that do write more, but it's 3,000 words a day, 5 days a week, and you have to do that. 6 weeks ideally to finish a book, but usually 2 months. And yeah, just churn those words out, get the stories out.
I think a lot of people would find that pace really kind of shocking. And that's as a professional writer, that's the kind of pace that you need to be setting for yourself, isn't it?
Well, if you hit 3,000 words a day, 15,000 words a week, so if you think 15, you do 4 weeks, you've got your 60,000. That's not enough really for a novel, but it's enough to form the basis of a novel. You need to get another week then, so another 15,000 words, get you up to 75. 75 is perfectly acceptable for a novel these days. That's longer than, say, something like Starship Troopers, but nothing like a sort of a Lord of the Rings or a Harry Potter book. But more than enough for mass market paperbacks, or equivalent of now.
Yeah.
So, it just becomes just like anything else you do. You have a schedule. So, and I sit at my computer, I start just after 9 o'clock. I know I have to get 1,000 words done by lunch. So I usually aim to get sort of the first 1,000 done by sort of 11s, have a cup of tea, then do maybe another 500 to 750, have lunch. And then I got the afternoon where I'm less productive. I write better in the morning. So I do another 1,000 to 1,250 words in the afternoon. And that's my base. If you can do more than that, which if you get into, if it's an action sequence, you can go up, you can double that in a day, no problem. If it's talking, basically if it's not action, if it's anything other than action, it takes a lot longer to write. And then you just have to do that. And it's one of those things, they're always asking, how do you write? And it's really lame because the answer you give them isn't the one they want. They want a magic formula. And it's, how do you write? And I sit down, I load Word, and I start writing. Which I know doesn't help. It's like saying, how do you play the guitar? And you pick it up and start playing. But with a guitar, you have to learn how to do that first. And you just have to force yourself to do it. I know maybe some people wouldn't find that very comfortable, but you just got to get a schedule. And I think because we're a small business, the 3 of us are writers and one's a full-time editor, and we have a sequence. So Nick and I'm just finishing my book. Nick finished his book recently, so that's due to go out. He'll be starting. He's already started his next one. We have a sequence. So if I don't finish on time, so if I'm running late, that will push next book back, and it means the editor's got nothing to do for a week. So we have to have the books finished to slot in so the next one can come out. But you do get used to it. And there are, and if you go back to sort of classical literature, there are structures to stories and events that are timeless and that have always been used. And even when you don't think about it, you still do it. You write a fight scene, and it doesn't just come out of nowhere. It might come out of sparring that you've done, a film that you saw, something you read in a book, and the elements will fuse together, and then you just put them on paper or on the screen.
That's fantastic. You know, it's really cool. It just occurred to me. You guys have this really cool family business that you're doing, and that's really sort of timeless. I find that very fascinating, in a very splendid kind of way. And but quick question. I mean, you guys are pretty tight knit, you and your brother. It sounds like. And I have brothers. I have two brothers, and so I kind of understand a little bit about how that works. But so you guys are, you work close together, you run this school together. How do you guys settle spats?
We don't have spats. There's a simple way. No, we don't live far away, and in our terms we're quite close in terms of distance. In American terms, we're basically next door.
Yeah.
I live about 12 miles away from Nick.
Okay, that's pretty close.
So that's it's not sort of walking distance for the day, but close. And until COVID hit, we sat next to each other when we worked. Now we had a place in our local town where we had as our studio, which we closed down during COVID because we couldn't work there anymore.
Right.
So we closed it. We didn't use it for a year. It was just an asset that was costing money, so we sold it, and we both work from home now. But until then, we spent a decade sat next to each other. We had a big L-shaped desk, and Nick was in one corner, I was the other. So, and if I wanted to throw something at him, it hit him on the head, and he was right next to him. I could hit him with a foam sword. He was that close. But no, we've always done stuff together. He's 10 years younger, but we've been watching. We were watching Schwarzenegger films in the 80s together. And I say that, and he was born in the 80s, so you appreciate how young he was watching Schwarzenegger films.
Yeah.
And then up through reenactment, video gaming, we do all that kind of stuff. I talk to Nick every day, work related, fencing related, or just we're doing a bit of 40K or something. We'll be chatting about that.
Yeah,
video comms makes life that much easier. So FaceTime every day. There's always things for us to talk about. We're fencing twice a week. This weekend we'll be doing some 40K games on the Saturday. So
with Henry Cavill.
Of course. Yeah, you might pop around halfway.
Yeah, I'm sure he will.
But we don't have. No, I don't. We've never really had an argument about anything. And it's the same with the club as well. We don't have any arguments there because we decided at the start that we were going to operate it as a dictatorship of two. So there will be no democracy unless somebody wants to step up and do the work, which nobody ever has offered to do.
Never does. No, I think that's great that you guys, if someone's like, hey, well, why do we do it this way? And the other bro just cuts them off at the pass, right? Just like, come on, let's do it this way.
It's quite simple. If Nick has an idea and I don't like it, we don't do it. And if I have an idea and Nick doesn't like it, we don't do it.
Perfect.
So unless we agree, there's no argument then. It's quite simple. It's either unanimous or it doesn't happen. So we were talking about bringing in gradings. We've gone through phases since 2006 as to whether we want kind of gradings and ranks, and they kind of come and go because other groups sometimes do it and sometimes don't. Mm-hmm. We talk about it, but every time we do it, it's always we can't both quite decide it's a good idea. So we won't do it then, and that way there's never an argument. There can't be an argument. Everything's quite straightforward. If there's a decision to be made that other people might want to get involved with, we talk about it first. We decide, what the options are that we will accept, and then we'll ask other people. But people don't want it anyway. They come to a fencing club. They want to fence. They don't want to take part in some kinds of sort of politics and messing around of organising a club. Well, most people do anyway. So we don't have that structure. And we set it up. We do all of the work. We record all the videos for YouTube, which are just thrown out there for the community in general. Yeah. So
your website's quite the resource too. I have used it, and it. Thank you. I'll just say that. Okay. Yeah, it's fantastic.
Yeah, we've got some more stuff that needs to go on there actually, but But basically, we pay for the bandwidth, which is, and it's so cheap these days anyway. It's not like it used to be. So we just dump stuff up there. We give away as much as we can because again, we don't run it as a business.
Right.
All we ever need the money for is to cover our costs. As long as our costs are covered, we don't mind.
Yeah. So okay, so let's if you don't mind, let's transition a little bit. So if I'm a new student and I'm going into your club, right? What could I expect? Like, how does that work?
Well, the first thing is, do you turn up on time or not?
Let's
So,
assume that I do. Let's assume that I'm a good,
okay.
willing student.
Okay, yeah, that's a good start. So if you turn up on time, you find a kind of a strange band of people waiting outside the doors to go in. So you'll find all kinds of weird, colourful clothing because everybody used to be in black, but we encourage people to wear whatever they want in terms of HEMA.
Yeah.
Not sort of clown costumes or something, but if you want to go all out on your lounge net, I say that, that's my stuff. But if you want to go all out with really fancy Pluderhosen, that's fine. All colours great. But there's a mob of people waiting, loads of gear, sort of bag after bag. You know what it's like, or just no matter how little stuff you think you're taking, it's still at least one carload. So yeah, there's loads of people waiting. If it's the Bristol Club, there's probably 15, 20 people waiting to go in. So they're not all there yet, but they're waiting to go in. And people just start talking to you. You've got no choice really. If you're standing there, you're going to get talked to by somebody. So they'll start talking to you, which usually means talking about swords. And then before you know it, you'll be through the doors and we'll be getting started. And we start our warm up immediately. So that would be sort of a new person's first encounter at the club will be the warm up, which is something we took partially from something we sort of found with our Scandinavian friends, and also from our reenactment days, which is it's a warm up based on a game that's quite similar to dodgeball. We get 6 balls, as in football, soccer balls.
The round type, yeah.
Yeah. 6 balls and 2 foam bucklers so that people don't get hurt with the bucklers. And everybody starts running around. So the hall builds up. So we go from 20, 30, 40 people in a big sports hall. And you throw or kick the balls at people if it hits them. So the object is to hit people with the balls. If it hits them, if you throw it and it hits them, 10 star jumps. If you kick it and it hits them, 10 press ups. And we do that for a good 15 minutes or so. So if you don't know anybody, the very first thing is you're thrown into this kind of horde of people running around, salivating with their victories as they sort of hit people mid-air with the ball and force them to do press-ups. And that's the first thing. So I tell new people the best way to get sort of introduced to a new group of people is to just try and hit them in the face with the ball. So it's fun. The balls are soft, so you don't get hurt. Not much anyway.
Yeah.
And also the warm up it's a little nicer than the usual sort of traditional standing in rows, everybody stretching and doing stuff, because you might get somebody that's older, who've got aches and pains, they've had sort of surgery, maybe they're fit, maybe they're not, who knows, there could be all kinds of things, and it can be quite intimidating lining up and people doing stuff that you think I couldn't do this 20 years ago, let alone now. But our warm up, you can walk, you can run, you can stand still. If you can't do the press-ups, then something else. So the only objective is that you're loose and warm by the end of it and you're sweating like crazy.
Yeah. So dodgeball, I mean, in the States, we call it dodgeball. So basically...
Yeah, but it's a free-for-all, so everybody just runs around. Once the ball's in your hand, it's like netball, so you can't move.
Gotcha.
So you're frozen. But then you just boot the ball in any direction you like. If you hit them in the face, you both get punished. And if you catch the ball, the person that attacked you gets punished.
Yeah.
Which and then 2 people have bucklers as sort of wild cards. So they run around and they can deflect the ball, hit them. It sounds complicated, but the main thing is that people are running around, they're sliding on the floor, they're jumping through the air, trying to hit people. And I honestly think if we just said we'll do that for 2 hours, they would love it. You cannot stop them. It's basically when the warm up is over, people look disappointed. So that's the first thing we do. So if you're a new person, if you turn up on time or a few minutes into the start, that's what you'll see, which that might put people off because they might look and think, well, where are the swords? So that hasn't happened yet. This is just getting you ready.
Yeah.
And then after that, we get started on the lesson. We got 2 clubs, one in England, one in Wales, but still quite close to each other, 25 minutes apart, because we're right on the border, sort of in the march. And each school runs, basically me and Nick alternate in instructing. So at the moment, Nick is teaching small sword and saber in Bristol. I'm teaching longsword and mezza in our Welsh school, and then we flip. So we do 2 months, and then we change over. So I'll move to great swords, so spy-handers in Bristol, and then Nick will be doing, I forget what he's doing, but he'll be doing something else in Wales for 2 months. So there's a constant sort of rotation of weapons and systems. Nick with a primary emphasis, not completely, but an emphasis on kind of Napoleonic, sort of spadroon, saber, broadsword type stuff.
Yeah.
And then mine concentrating mainly on Maya and sort of 16th century stuff. So mezza, dussac, longsword, early rapier, side sword, Maya's rapier, that kind of stuff. So yeah, we then drill for 45 minutes to an hour, and then for the last sort of half or so of the session, everybody gets their kit, and then they fight. And you can do whatever you like then. So as long as you have the gear, and you know what it's like again with the sort of conditions. You fight to the person you're sparring with, so you kind of match kit and do what you like. You go sword and shield, bring your spears, halberds, axes, anything you like
for the sparring.
Yeah, and anything's fine. Basically, sparring is time for you to do whatever you like, as far as sparring is concerned.
See, now that's really fun. I like, because it's pretty common to have your, 3 divisions in class, right? You've got your warm-ups, you've got your skill drill, right? The technique, and then the sparring. But you guys did something really fantastic with the warm-up, something super fun. You've got your technique drills, and then at the end it's sparring, but it's just free-for-all sparring, which is super cool. That's unique, I think.
We do throw bits. Well, the other thing as well is that's how we always did things. I think we started 2006. We hadn't seen another club, so it's not like we could see what everybody else was doing. So that's just the way we decided to do it. I honestly don't know quite how other groups do things, because when we go to sparring events, or we travel to other schools and sort of teach at various things. But seeing a kind of a normal regular class is something different. But one thing when we had shorter classes of 90 minutes, we found there wasn't enough sparring time. And some people, myself and Nick included, were all about the fighting. The fighting is first. That's the bit we like.
Yeah.
And we find, because we weren't getting enough of it, we used to say, well, the last session of every month will be fighting only, which is fine. But then there are some people that don't want to fight, so they wouldn't turn up, or they treat it as an optional thing. So we changed it. We thought, being as we got 2-hour sessions now, we'll keep the last 50 minutes up to an hour, depending on how long the drills go on for. And then you can just spar away. I mean, a lot of people spar with the things that we've been practicing. So if we've been doing saber and small sword, they'll go and do saber and small sword. But if you really, really, really love your longsword, do a whole hour of longsword. It's completely up to you.
Yeah.
And it means then that you don't, because there are some people that just aren't interested in certain weapons, or are less interested. But but at least if you only have to drill it, so then maybe longsword's not your thing. There are some people who just don't like longsword. Well, you can drill it, but for the last hour you can go back to your favourite sword. So if it's a spadroon, you can go and do that for an hour. So you're still going to get to do the thing you really like. So we've been doing that for years now. And,
I like that. That's really cool. And the group fighting that you guys do, that's kind of unique as well. And that's something that I kind of wanted to get into. How do you manage that? How does that work? It looks like you guys are playing games. Like, tell me more.
The group fighting, it's an interesting one. That it's a sort of a spin-off in some ways for some of the training we do. So Nick did the Pringle Green stuff, so the naval boarding action bits. So we've got some scenarios we based on that. But before that, we were doing group fighting anyway. It comes down to whether we're doing it in class or if we're doing it at one of our sparring events. Because we do a sparring event every 3 months, where we invite anybody from any club to come and basically fight for 4 hours. And usually as part of that, last half an hour to an hour is group fighting. So we do various scenarios. And they just tend to be slightly bigger than our normal ones. But most people are really into the melee stuff. Not everybody, which is understandable. Some people want to treat it more like it's a one-on-one. There is, as you know from the stuff you do, I keep saying that, but that's because you do it. The minute you include more than 2 people, you introduce a chaotic element.
Yeah.
And the more people you add, the more chaotic it becomes. And that can be a problem for some because it means you could be hit from different directions. It's just a bit rougher, and there's a bit of rough and tumble that not everybody enjoys. But for the people that do enjoy it, we like to sort of to experiment with the scenarios that aren't just one person versus one, because we all do get into a habit of fighting like for like, which I think is not ideal all the time. So you practice longsword against longsword, saber against saber, spadroon against spadroon, axe against axe, and sort of mismatched combinations are something we often miss out on. And then when you get a group fight, you find the strengths and the weaknesses of the kind of the weapon, even maybe one you like, completely change.
Yes.
So you might feel super confident with a saber on your own, but then the minute you've got 20 people around you fighting on your side, and you've got a mixture of other weapons thrown in, you'll find suddenly your saber is really good when they get close, but as the halberds and the spears are coming for you, you're wondering why you bother bringing the saber.
Right.
And that's that is interesting, and we do have plans. What we really do want is to be able to do. We're looking at sort of armor and weapons, so we can do this sort of on a larger scale. But we want to be able to do a proper 16th century block. So we want to have pikes, halberds, flyhanders, and small weapons in two groups, so that we can actually have some proper group fighting with the kind of the military weapons of the period. So Pringle Green stuff we can do because that's boarding action. So it's sort of boarding pikes are the biggest things. Pikes are unfortunately a problem because we need them to break down because most people don't have vehicles that can carry pikes.
Yeah.
Sort of 14 to 18 foot pikes are a bit of a problem.
It's kind of tough.
But yeah, and then in terms of the melees, we keep changing it around because because your life is not on the line, you need to introduce things to make it try and play out more as you would expect it to. So when your life doesn't matter and you have a scenario with an objective, you can throw people away, which I appreciate is historical to a point, but you may not be quite so keen to volunteer to do it. It's
Right.
going to rush forward and die. So we do try to introduce various things to get around that. So we keep changing it. So we change it so people don't get used to it.
There's an expectation that the fighter is going to live, right? Like if you have your marching orders, if you think I could get through this, you're more likely to do it.
Yeah, that's why we did. Not last weekend, I think the weekend before. A friend of ours, Jordan, that runs the Academy of Steel in Cardiff. His group were running an event in Cardiff, a sort of 2-day event, and me and Nick were invited to teach a greatsword class. So we did that. And as part of the class, we had 2 scenarios, both group scenarios. One was the military scenario and one was the civilian. And the civilian scenario was based on some of the original text, which was using a large 2-hander, sort of like a Montante or small spy-hander, to defend your property. So, but if you run it just as a simple scenario, it doesn't work. So your property, we just put an object on the ground, and you had to stop people stealing it. But if your life doesn't matter and you've got 6 scumbags with sort of cudgels and knives, a couple of them will die just running in to keep you busy so somebody can steal it.
Yeah.
But if you're a little mob of thugs and you want to steal somebody's property, you don't want to die. And as we know with most groups of thugs, if you kind of beat down on the leader or the one that's causing trouble, you can usually break and make them run away. And I'm talking in terms of bladed weapons and fists, not when there are guns involved. But,
right.
But that's not out.
Yeah.
So
with
that scenario, we thought we'd do a bottle out rule. So if any of the sort of mob, if any of them were hit, the rest of the gang panicked and ran away. So we thought we'd do that. Then suddenly they have to have a care for their lives. So if somebody's a bit of a prat and they move in close, and then they try and duck down to grab the object, and the spy-hander hits them in the head, the rest of the group look at their buddy that's just been hit in the head with a 2-handed sword that's basically bleeding out on the floor, and then they look at the little pouch with coin in or whatever it's going to be, and they think, nah, not today, and they run. So we thought so if you introduce an element like that, suddenly the scenario becomes more interesting, as opposed to how quickly can we steal it and how few people can we lose.
Mm-hmm.
So you're treating it more like a game then, but you're introducing safeguards to make it more interesting, and in that way, suddenly the Montante feels like a much more dangerous weapon because you don't want to die, which is the thing you didn't have until you introduced the
Right.
bottleneck rule.
And you don't want to die.
Yeah. So yeah, we did that, and then we did the kind of the military scenario, which was supposed to be your pike block has been sort of routed. Your standard has been sort of out in the open. So the officer was with the standard. You've got sort of 8 doppelsoldners with their Zweihanders, sort of will close ranks around the standard, and then the mob. So I think we had, it was either 6 or 8 Zweihanders, an officer, standard bearer, and a couple of guys with sabers, sort of like sergeants, or sort of similar, and then about 30 people attacking them, and they just have to go in basically as a mass and lose as few people as they could and take the colours. And that was to give them an idea of using these big weapons in a close group formation. And sadly, we didn't have a huge amount of time to practice it, because me and Nick have done a lot of group fighting in the past, albeit reenactment fighting, but we have done large group stuff, with sort of 2,000-3,000 people on the field.
Oh, wow, yeah.
And one of the things that we found is that when people haven't done that before, they just don't work effectively as a group. So they spread out in a line and they fight. They basically get tunnel vision, which is usually what happens in a melee. In fact,
isn't that interesting?
Yeah, I say in a melee, I think any dangerous scenario, people tend to focus, they narrow down on whatever's happening in front.
Right, and that's why you need that buddy. It's interesting. If I could just steal a moment, group fighting and those dynamics are just so different from that one-on-one.
Oh yeah,
you got that one-on-one, and you can zoom in and just hyper focus on that person. But you do that in a group fight, you're not going to make it very long. You're just not, especially if the other team, if they've worked with each other, because all they're going to do is the front guy's going to lock you up, and you're going to get ear hold from the side.
Well, that's where
all the time.
Yeah, that's where I think Pringle Green is good. Because Pringle Green is one of those rare manuals that actually discusses small unit fighting. There's in a few hundred people on each side. Yeah. And the one thing that's quite obvious from Pringle Green is that the individual training, other than the basics, is not the thing that he's actually interested in. It's the management and control of small groups. So you have an officer, you have somebody in charge, you have a chain of command, so you have junior officers below them, you have groups of people that respond to the junior officer, and the way you use those groups is the way that you change the fight. So individual epic fencers are utterly useless. As you say, you can be super an excellent fencer, concentrating on 2 people in front of you, and the third person that joined last week stabbed you in the side. Because you can't keep an eye on everything that's going on, or maybe you should.
Because they rolled a flank on you and you just didn't see it coming.
Yeah, you just can't. And again, if you've got an officer or the equivalent of an officer, and they're saying, keep him engaged, hit him from there. They're shouting the orders, they're managing the fight, not getting involved in the fight.
And that's its own skill, is keeping them engaged, right? So you're not overcommitting, you're not fighting, but you're keeping them engaged. You're keeping them there. You're keeping their intention. You want them to stay right there. That's its own thing.
Yep, exactly. And you think that's the classic sort of NCO with the small group as well. It's their job to make sure that people are not just locking in front. And sort of, if you're standing there and you can't see your friends to your sides, then you're either too far forwards or they're not there anymore. So you've got to do something. And yeah, it is really interesting because it shows you individual performance is far less important than the group performance.
Yeah.
And yeah, it does change things. You can you can drill people in 1 hour and get them performing well in the melee, surprisingly well, compared to a group of people that have been fighting for years that haven't worked together. And you see them, they all go off and be their own individual heroes. And they probably do they may maybe take 1 or 2 out, but the numbers don't, the mathematics don't work for them. If one person's hacking at you, you can only have your sword in one place at one time, and it's very hard to parry 2 swords when a third is coming for you.
Yeah, and I can't prove this. But that's why I think the Greeks were so into sports, because the guys who are working with each other. Because as we sort of described before, when you're spear and shield fighting, it's pretty basic. You're just looking for that opening and you're just spamming them with points, trying to make something happen. but the magic is the group dynamic, right? Like what you're talking about. You gotta see what's happening, especially in a phalanx. You got to make sure that that there's no gaps between you guys that they can exploit. You got to make sure that your flanks are covered. You got to make sure that there's someone calling the shots so everyone stays together, right? Like what you're saying in Pringle Green, and those guys having played sports together helps with that whole situational awareness.
Yeah, and even when there's nothing actually on the line other than losing effectively a game, it's surprising how quickly things can fall apart when people think they're going to lose. So
Yeah.
the kind of the route, you think in terms of routing, you think that would only happen in an absolute panic. But if you've got people and there are gaps, and then you can see a group in front of you are formed up and they're pushing, it doesn't take long before the people at the front want to move somewhere else. And you go from maybe only being one or two people down to a whole group of just panicked and broken, and it happens really quickly. And the only way to stop it is to get them reformed and back in, and that's where the people that have got the experience that get their group back into or bring in another group to replace them, and that's where the kind of the small group combat really comes in. And I think it also allows people that maybe don't have a huge amount of individual experience with fencing. They can really get stuck into it because they basically they can actually have a much greater effect on the fights than if they were fighting on their own anyway.
Yeah,
But,
yeah.
and also it's just really good fun.
It is.
The boarding action stuff is quite handy because it's bizarrely a sort of it's a sort of a recorded sort of thing. It's also quite important to us as in sort of Brits. Just because kind of the naval boarding thing, sort of naval warfare itself is sort of more significant to us than for a lot of other people, especially for the period, and heavily recorded. But you're generally talking matters of dozens to scores or hundreds of people. So it fits in absolutely really well with these scenarios, and you can lay out. And if you look at the Pringle Green manual, there are diagrams showing the layouts of ships, and in terms of where you can board and where they might be boarded from. So you can recreate a scenario where a ship is being boarded from two directions, and you can do that with very few objects. You can set up a scenario with just sports bags if you like. These are the gunwales, you can't cross them. If you step over the gunwale here, you fall into the water and you're out. So you have your crossing points. You can put sort of sections in the middle of the ship that can't be crossed, so they might be loading. I forgot what we call them. We open up the doors and you load stuff in from the top. It's gone completely out of my head. But like cargo door type things.
Yep.
Or boats. You think you have boats on the deck as well. So you can just mark areas off that are dead zones and you have your fight. And it is really good fun. And you've got people with their kind of reversed flintlock pistols and sabers, half pikes, sort of going at it all with their hatchets and their axes. And it's really good fun. And if you introduce rules that keep the fight going on a bit longer, so you have a system where they can come back after a certain amount of time for sort of additional waves of people, and we've had them where where it's gone on for 10-15 minutes and they're absolutely shattered, but they've got to do something to stop the other sort of side being able to bring any more people on, so they really have to push and it gets really tense and they're almost about to win, and then sort of one person manages to push them back and then it gets all the way pushed back. And you read about it. You look at some of the frigate sort of battles in the War of 1812, and you think you've got some of these sort of brutal frigate engagements with sort of ships boarding and then counter-boarding, and then going back at it again, and it's sort of going on for an hour. So there's some really juicy accounts that you can incorporate into a really good scenario.
That sounds super fun, and
it is fun.
Well, just the fact that because your club is probably one of the biggest out there, at least from my knowledge. We've got about, on a good night, we're getting maybe a dozen fighters in adult class. So I have my youth class. It's about a dozen people, anywhere from 8 to a dozen show up, and about the same for the adult class. But you guys, you're talking what, 30, 40 people sometimes?
Yeah, like yesterday was quite below average. I think we were 28 or 29.
Okay,
For
quite a
Bristol.
few.
Yeah, that's our larger group. We normally have we'd expect 35 up to 40, and then
Hmm.
sometimes it goes over that at Bristol. The Welsh school has always been smaller. Wales is it's got a much smaller population anyway,
Yeah.
and we're not next to any main cities. So like our friends in the Academy of Steel are actually in the capital. So I think their groups in the capital are sort of getting closer to what we are in Bristol.
Hmm.
So our Welsh club is usually more like just into the double figures. So between 8 and 12, 13, 14 people in the Welsh one. But that's, I said we're out in the country. It's two roads down from my house. So it's just in this village near the border. But yeah, we've I think we've got about 200 people actually on the books, but they don't all turn up at the same time.
Sure.
And we don't actively recruit people. We haven't done that for a long time.
Wow.
We do have the YouTube channel,
Hmm.
which we put content on, sort of reviews and instructional stuff, and that does sort of bring in a trickle of people, and that's enough to basically maintain numbers. So we haven't. We could probably do with some recruiting around here in Wales, but certainly in England, there's no point.
Hmm.
We've got loads of people. But there are HEMAs, is doing really well. There are a lot of schools. Like when we run a sparring event, and our next one is not this weekend, but the weekend after, so quite soon. And in terms of groups around us, we've got the Academy of Steel, got a number of clubs in Wales. We've got multiple clubs down in the southwest of England, up to the Midlands, where these are all places, but basically within an hour and a half to 2 hours drive, we've got dozens and dozens of HEMA schools.
That's fantastic.
Well, we're actually in a good position because I don't know how well you know the kind of the geography of. I talk about these places, and they may be meaningless. I don't know.
Well, I've looked at them on a map before, but I've never been. So, but that's okay. A lot of people have, and so if you want to describe it, it's fine.
Well, if you take Bristol as it used to be sort of like the greatest sort of city in the southwest. Maybe it still is. I don't know. I don't live there, so I wouldn't say. But if you take that as the sort of the large sort of urban city, and it's slap bang on a crossroads of motorways, sort of like the freeways, so north, south, east, and west, so slap bang in the middle of a crossroad. And if you head west, it takes you into Wales. If you head east, it takes you to London. If you head north, it takes you to the Midlands, so Birmingham. If you head south, it takes you into the West Country, so all the way down to the south coast. And so they're basically the two main arterial routes. So we can meet, like if you want to go to fight camp, you just go north of Bristol. If you want to go to a London event, it's an hour and a half to London, maximum hour and 20 minutes or so, just heading east. East? Yeah, east. So we're actually in a really good position, even though we're sort of a fair way from London, as in British terms, a fair way. I appreciate so an hour and a half is not really that far, but for us, that's a long way.
Well, I mean, geographically speaking, for the entirety of the U.S., it's not that big a deal. But as far as like your daily what you're willing to do in a day, it's pretty far.
Well, like when we started, we were there was I think one other group near Swansea in South Wales, but we'd never even seen them. So we were the only club really operating in the whole of South Wales and southwest of England to any kind of note. Now there are in that same area. There's probably at least 12 clubs just in that area. So there's basically wherever you are, there's going to be a club pretty much. So there's lots of them around, and there are new ones now. Almost every month, there's another one forming. So people ask us all the time, well, do we want to open up more, sort of AHFs? But I mean, we've got other things that we do. Fencing is a big part of our lives, but it's not the only thing in our lives.
Right.
2 nights a week, plus all the other stuff that we do related to it. Even the videos, the research. That takes up a good chunk of our time, and we want to do other things, as well. Now we do a bit of war gaming or 40k or something on the weekends. If you want to do some reading that isn't fencing related, you want some non-HEMA time as well.
Yeah.
So we're not really interested if other people want to set up schools. That's cool, but we've got ours. It's done well. It's been around a long time, and it'll stay, and it'll be around a long time as well. So.
Mm-hmm.
Two is perfectly fine for us.
Yeah, that's good. That's great. Yeah, I think a lot of people, who don't put out, who don't have a YouTube channel, for example, there's a lot of work having a YouTube channel and making sure that, if you care about it being big or whatever, or even not, you just want to put good content on. That takes a long time to sort of plan and prep, and the lighting's got to look good, this and that, the editing, can you hear what I'm saying, and all that stuff. That takes a lot. It takes a lot to do for people who've never done it. And then planning your classes, that takes a long time. Like we go once a week, but I have I run two clubs kind of in parallel, and I probably spend I don't know, I'd say probably between 15 and 20 hours a week, just running the thing, this whole deal. And like you say, I mean, I'm not making a bunch of money doing this. It's just I love it and I want to share, and I need to cover the costs. And I have a life. I got, just like everyone else. I have my own life too. I got
Yeah.
I got a bunch of kids. I'm married and job, all that stuff. So you want to do is the cool sword stuff, but as soon as it becomes sort of a slog, there's this, how much I guess a fun term these days is the juice starts not to be worth the squeeze.
I've not heard that, but it makes sense. No,
Yeah.
we did for a time we did 3 a week, so we did Monday, Wednesday, Friday. But we found if we did that, the fencing basically became the thing you did when you weren't working.
Yeah.
So you were either working or you were fencing or getting ready for fencing, and it's fine. And I know some people are really into it, and kind of the fencing bit is basically their life outside of work. But not for us. We've got other things as well. As I said, it is a big part of it. But yeah, same with you. We've got other things in our lives as well that we want to get on with. So 2 sessions a week. Only a small number of our people go to both of them. One's in England, one's in Wales, but they are only 25 minutes apart, so it's not like there's a huge distance. But only a small number. Yeah, only a small number of people go to both. And yeah, I think that's definitely the 3 was a real pain. Even if you wanted to say go and see a film at the cinema, which has kind of died since COVID, we've actually been since then. But even then, before that, if you wanted to go to say the cinema, it would be sort of if you're working 3 nights a week with fencing, and that's not even your work. It's sort of in terms of downtime, and we've all got sort of partners. You spend time with them as well.
Yeah.
It doesn't leave
If
a
you
lot
want
of
to
time.
keep them, you do.
Yeah, you can't just be out fighting all the time. And yeah, I think 2 a week is good. And there are other clubs as well. So if you want to do more, you can go and train with them as well.
Mm-hmm.
And assuming you've got more. But we've certainly got plenty around us. If you wanted, you could probably practice every night of the week and travel no more than an hour.
Yeah, no, that's kind of unique. I mean, we have some where I'm at. So we're in Vancouver, Washington, which most people, even in the U.S., don't understand that there's a Vancouver inside the U.S.
I've been to Vancouver and Washington.
Oh, have you? Okay.
I spent a lot of time in the sort of northwest.
Okay. Yeah, no, I love it here. I'm a transplant. We moved here about 6 years ago. I grew up in San Diego area, so that's kind of where I hail from. But yeah, no, I mean, there's some good clubs around here. Most of them are south, into Oregon a little bit. But like you say, they're like 30, 45 minutes, maybe in heavy traffic, probably about a half an hour. So yeah, I mean, you can definitely club hop around here if you wanted to.
That's nice. And Vancouver as well is not too dissimilar to where we are in terms of the way it looks.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Yeah. Oh, I should say, as in when you get into the countryside, in terms of hills, water, and weather, it's not vastly different to where we are. Or at least my experience. So to the top end of Oregon, moving into Washington.
Okay, isn't that interesting?
It all felt quite familiar.
Yeah, it's weird. I like it. So, I wasn't born in well, I was born in Arizona, so I'm a Western kid, a desert kid, and you know, moving to California, it's kind of like, oh yeah, it's desert, but with some really cool palm trees and you know the beaches close by and stuff like that. But coming to Washington, it's like my body really liked it. You know, I did an ancestry.com thing, and it turns out that a fair bit of my ancestors come from Manchester area, and so
Okay.
yeah, and you know, I don't know what that means exactly. I've seen Manchester on a map. I've never been, but yeah, I know something about my body really liked the weather here, and I felt like in a weird elemental way, like oh, I'm kind of sort of coming home. You know, it was weird.
So you're turning into an honorary Brit because you just talk about weather. That's
Well, yeah, we talk about weather every day in Vancouver, Washington. Again, it's pretty similar, I suppose.
yeah. I know Washington State. It's nice. I very much like going there. It's a kind of the temperate climate, the
Hmm.
countryside, and I live in the country myself.
Okay, yeah, it's beautiful.
Yeah, yeah. I like the greenery. I like hills, trees. Yeah, it's it all felt quite familiar. Just everything's bigger, but that's the American way, isn't it?
We try to make it that way. Yeah.
Yeah, it's nice. I spent a lot of time in Oregon as well. Well, I haven't been there for sort of 2 decades now,
Yeah.
but yeah, we really like the Northwest. It's well, saying that, there hasn't been anywhere I've been in the US I haven't liked. I spent most of my time on the West Coast, a bit on the East, but
Okay. West Coast is better.
I prefer the West Coast. But that doesn't mean the East Coast isn't good.
No, I have a sister and her husband, and they live in New York. Man, I know where they live. They live in Brooklyn, and you know, so they're all over. And I love New York City. It's a cool place to visit. It's not for me to live. I'm like you. I like the greenery. I like the countryside a little bit better. So I live in the suburbs, but it's the gateway to the wilderness where I live, so it's kind of cool. 5 minutes just down the road, there's a cool trail I can take, and it's like I'm nowhere. So
Yeah, well, yeah, it's just very much. It's bizarre because where I am, and I think I'm 10 minutes from the motorway, so I've got a pretty much a direct link to the motorway, and then there are the bridges that go over into England. But I'm right in the middle of the old march, so it's the old kind of sort of middle ground between England and Wales historically. Sort of
okay.
the kind of the lawless area. That's we got sort of 600 castles in the march. It's where I live. It's a small village in at the bottom end of Monmouthshire, and there's basically we got one pub, two churches, and a post office. That's all we have. But the actual village, it's that the houses, most of the houses are inside the Roman walls. So unlike most of the Roman towns and cities in Britain, this one was never built on. So
Okay.
there were Roman walls built quite late, so around 200 AD or so,
Wow.
and most of it's still intact. So all of the perimeter walls are there. And then once it was abandoned in sort of the 4th century, it was just left, ignored for sort of 1,000 years or so, and pillaged a little bit for stone. And then the village was built sort of in the middle of it, but just houses and the church and stuff. And then nothing else was really built here. So, and if you want to go and walk the dog, you open the front door, cross the road, and then you've got the Roman walls. In the middle of the Roman walls, there's an sort of Romano-British temple, the old forum, some shops and villas and stuff that have been sort of unearthed, and underneath the grass, everywhere here is Roman, so it's all covered up because nobody comes here. But if you've got a shovel and dug, you'd find Roman structures everywhere here. So we've got that on our doorstep, and then 8 miles back towards Newport, there's castles there, and then the Roman amphitheatre and the barracks for the Second Augusta legions there. And go in the other direction to Chepstow, that's sort of 5 minutes away. There's a castle there. Let's do them. So yeah, we got some really cool stuff. What's cool stuff?
That's
That's not
really
really
cool
specific. I can be more specific than that. But we've got. No, I put every week whenever I take my dog out, I'm always taking photos of my dog visiting some other place. But he's usually at Tinton Abbey or Raglan Castle, and nearly every week. So we're spoiled with all those old structures, sort of right on the doorstep.
Yeah, that's oh man, that's amazing. We have Fort Vancouver, which is actually not the real Fort Vancouver. It's sort of recreated Fort Vancouver. So I think it was built in, I don't know, it was 1976 or something like that.
Oh,
But it was built on the original spot. But that didn't get there till like what, 17, like mid 1700s or something like that.
isn't that the one that's got a sign that's erected and it says sort of the British are coming?
Well, maybe it did at one point, but yeah, it was a British fort. We just kind of, well, we're borrowing it for a long period,
That's fine.
and we took it.
Yeah, the Northwest is a nice place. It's yeah, it basically we feel very at home, sort of going somewhere like that.
Yeah, well, it's interesting because I mean, all the things that are named, right? You've got Vancouver, and then we have the mountain, which is Mount Hood, and that's named after the same person that the dreadnought was named after. No, Hood's not a dreadnought, was it? There was a battleship.
So, well, people argue about that. It was technically a battle cruiser, but
Okay.
it was sort of built right at the end of the First World War.
Okay.
But then the technical difference between a battleship and a battle cruiser at that time is down to the percentage of sort of mass given over to armor.
Okay.
But it was technically, if we hadn't had a whole list of treaties, it would have been the first of a new generation of battle cruisers. Instead, it ended up being the only one, so which is why it was so big. So it looks completely and it's actually slightly bigger than the Bismarck. People don't realize it. It's sort of a battle cruiser,
Really?
but a tiny bit bigger. And it was and it had been up armored so many times and had so much basically added to it over time that if you look at it, it's very low in the water. So if you look at the stern of the ship, you can see the upper deck. It sits really low. It's quite wet towards the rear of the ship, just because of all the extra armor added. Because it's a World War One ship,
Mm-hmm.
and the Bismarck was a brand new, effectively state of the art sort of Nazi warship.
Right.
But yeah, and we sort of, I think of Hood. We've got like a Royal Navy monument up in one of the hills, and it's got it's basically dedicated to all the Royal Navy captains and admirals from sort of Trafalgar and the Battle of the Nile, because the trees used to all be sort of basically all of the woodland was used for growing trees to be used for the battleships, the ships of the line. So up in Monmouth. So yeah. So it's
Okay.
even though we're not right next to the water. Although again, I say that, so we're not next to the water. We're never that far from the water.
Yeah, because can't you maybe not these days, but I mean the rivers are super navigable, aren't they? I mean that's kind of the beauty of the UK, isn't it? Like you could go from the ocean and maybe even load onto maybe a smaller barge, but those barges go all the way through the whole almost the entire country, doesn't it?
Yeah, where I live, you can't now, but in the Roman period, you could bring a barge into the village. If you scan the ground to on the south part of the village, there is still actually water running underneath the ground. So there was a waterway there, navigable waterway. So you could bring a ship to the coast, so on the Bristol Channel, and then you could bring barges up the along the water straight up to my village, which is in Caerwent.
Yeah.
But yeah, there's nowhere's very far from the water around here, and I consider we're sort of quite far away, but we're actually, I think, 5 minutes maximum from the sea. So I suppose we're actually quite close to the sea. I can actually see the sea from my upstairs window.
Can you? That's
Bad.
wonderful.
No, just about. I can see the bridge. I can see the bridges crossing into England. So if I could see the ground, the water below it, then I would. But unfortunately, there's land in the way.
Yeah.
So yeah, we're not that far away. So yeah, we do have good access to water.
It sounds like a very wonderful spot to be.
Well, I think so. To be fair, I think we've all got quite interesting places to be. But Nick, I think he's 10 minutes down the road, and he's in a large town. Well, technically a city now. He's sort of 10 minutes away, 10, 12 minutes away from where I am, which is quite weird.
Yeah. 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 Well, yeah, because I mean, my brothers are like 1,000 miles here and there.
Well, my sister's in Switzerland, so we're not all close by. But she runs a school in Switzerland, a school, not a HEMA school.
Yeah. Right. Very cool.
Yeah.
All right, so sounds like we're about ready to wrap this thing up, but really quickly, advice for someone who just discovered HEMA, they went
Okay.
down the rabbit hole on YouTube, and they're very interested. So, what would be some advice that you would give these guys or gals or whoever?
But the first thing, yeah, is I'd get onto social media and find somewhere like an overarching group for whichever country or place you're in. So where I am, there are various UK HEMA groups on Facebook. They're not official Burma groups. They're just just groups set up so that people from all around the UK can talk about HEMA. Find one of those, post in there, and find out where your local groups are. That's the first thing. So don't go onto Google or something, just because even now in 2023, there are some people running groups that are just not really up on setting up websites and stuff. So they might have a really good school and they've got no actual proper website, even though it seems weird, but there are plenty of people that still don't. So yeah, go somewhere like Facebook, find your national talkie group where people just talk about HEMA. Or it may not even be called HEMA, it may just be called historical fencing, which is what we always used to call it. So sort of find
It's
an
making a
overall.
comeback.
Yeah, I always preferred historical fencing just because that's actually what we do. We were interested in fencing with historical weapons. The actual geographic location and time period wasn't that important to us.
No, really.
But so find something like that where people are talking about fighting. Find out where your local groups are, because it's all about people. And as you said, you can learn sort of a good chunk of saber on your own, but ultimately you want to find people to train with or to fight with. Otherwise, you're just shadowboxing all the time. So yeah, find out where your local groups are, contact them, and then get your backside to one of them and have a look. You won't know till you go and see them, see what you think of the instructors, see what you think of the session. Go to a few of them, see which one kind of fits around, the kind of things you like. They really hardcore and they're all like Cobra Kai, all sort of neat units and sort of everybody drilling like a sort of like a regiment. That might be the kind of thing you want, or you might prefer something a little more casual. So if you've got multiple groups, go and check them out. And if you like it, before you buy anything, talk to the instructors. People always go off and buy stuff, and we all have finite resources. Even if you're doing really well, you still only have so much money to spend on stuff. Everybody makes mistakes. My first sword was a really big mistake. And so you don't want to waste your money, but better to spend the money on even stuff that's not particularly exciting, that doesn't cost a huge amount of money, and so you can get started. Because what you'll probably want to do is you want to buy a sword, and that's the first thing you want to do, because you're interested in swords. You're not joining a club because you want to buy a mask. You want to join a group so you can buy a cool sword. So find out first of all kind of an overriding group, a talking place in your country or region. Nail down some local groups, introduce yourself, go and see them, try them out. Don't spend any money. Try and keep that wallet closed for as long as possible until you can see what's going on. Because you might think everybody's using longsword, or buy that, but then you find out I actually really like saber, and now I can't afford to buy that saber. So to definitely talk to your instructors. It's the number one answer I would give to everybody about every question to do with HEMA, is talk to the instructors in the group you decide to join. Because every group has different requirements. There might be some rules. They might have some really good discounts with certain suppliers, and you don't know. If you don't ask, you don't find out. So talk to the instructors, and also if you don't like a particular group for whatever reason, if it's just not for you, see if there's another one that you can go and try out. Find one that actually matches what you want, because everybody's different. Everybody, they'll be looking for different things for the club. A group might be really interested in a particular weapon, or just one-on-one combat or group combat. Or they might just be really into the athletic side of it, love ringing, and you maybe really just don't want to have people sort of touching and throwing you around all the time. So why would you train there? It's not your thing. But always just keep coming back all the time to talk to the instructors, because they're the ones that have been doing it ages. They've seen all the junk. They know the stuff not to mess around with. They'll save you so much money, and you can buy all the pretty stuff then, like your nice shield behind you. You can actually buy a cool shield rather than a sword that maybe we've had people that have turned up to when we've been running a class, when we went to our first fight camp back in 2008, I think it was. I was teaching a mezza class, and a guy turned up with a sharp katana for the class.
Oh yeah.
And again, you might have bought that because you really like swords. Well, that's fine, but you can't use it for training.
Right.
So that's what I would do first, and then once you get started, you're kind of just the structure of what you do. Well, it's basically going to fit around the class anyway, so you shouldn't have to think too hard about that, and then just go with it. But definitely, the instructors will save you a lot of heartache. And assuming they're not really bad instructors, in which case they could cause you loads of heartache.
That's good advice. Yeah.
Just because I know I've known so many people, and they don't listen. That you talk to them and you say, they're getting started. Buy some synthetic swords to get started if you're not too sure about things. Mm-hmm. So over in the UK and the rest of Europe, the Black Fencer stuff is easy to get and cheap. I know they're a bit of a pain to get in the US.
All the good stuff is kind of a pain to get in the US.
You can get Purple Heart stuff you can get, which is real pain for us.
Oh, well, that's true. And Purple Heart stuff is it's very functional. I have some of the stuff, great people to buy from. They don't look as nice as the Black Fencers, though. The
Black Fencer stuff, we've been buying from them and talking to them and with them for years and years now. Yeah. And they develop and they improve all the time. So with our people, I would recommend, unless there's something you really want it, go synthetic, buy a few items that aren't too expensive. So they're new versions of their sabers and longswords with the kind of the nice edge profile on them. They're balanced, they handle nicely, they kind of stick and bounce better than they used to, and everything is just so cheap. And then their steel range. My main saber that I use is my 1803 slotted hilt, and it's called Goldie because it's gold, and it's died 3 times, and every time it's gone back to them like Narsil, and it's come back better and stronger than ever, and it's just my favorite sword. And you think they started off making synthetics, and now they make really, really good steel. So
that's so cool that they've just watching them expand from the synthetics to the steel, and I thought, okay, those are pretty cool looking. So yeah, it's good to hear that they take care of you like that.
We've got loads. Like we've got an order with them at the moment, and it's many, many thousands of pounds worth of swords that's about to be shipped to us.
Yeah.
And basically, as soon as we have an order arrives, we put in another order straight away. But yeah, they're really good guys. And saying that, there are loads of really good HEMA companies out there. But Black Fencer is, and if you look around our club, there's Black Fencer stuff everywhere, and they're always experimenting, and we're always trying to get them to experiment to make other exciting, interesting things. Yeah, the stuff's great. I'm not going to start getting stuff off the wall because you're running hours. I've got loads of stuff there, but we've. The synthetic swords is actually one of the things I've forgotten about. In terms of if you're just getting started, you're not quite sure what to do. Synthetics will save you a fortune. They're not the same as steel, but they're a lot better than say using foam or wood. And I use my synthetics nearly every session. Like last night, I didn't do any longsword, but I did Dussac, Mezza, side sword, and saber, and it was a mix straight down the middle of steel and synthetic, and you can just flip between them. And they're cheap. I can't remember how much a saber is over here. I think it's about 60 quid.
Really?
I think maybe 70 quid. I hope this is not going to be like one of the politicians is asked about the price of a loaf of bread.
No, yeah.
Three times more.
By the time they get here, they're just over $100.
Okay, so it's about 80 quid over here. So they're probably about 70 then, thinking about it. So you pay the sort of the colony tax.
Yes, we do.
And saying that, we pay a tax as well because we're not part of the European Union anymore. So we get to pay VAT on stuff coming in.
Yeah.
But their stuff is exceptionally good, and there's so many suppliers. Kavitin in not Russia anymore, wherever they've gone to, Georgia.
Georgia now, yeah.
I think Georgia. They make really great stuff as well.
I love my Kavitin.
I've got quite a bit of their stuff. In fact, yeah, again, I'm not going to put. In fact, that's
That
the
one
wherever it
there.
is. That one there, the side sword there, that's a Cavetton. That's a
I
Kraken.
thought it was.
That's a Kraken sword above it from one of your American friends in Florida.
Yeah.
But yeah, there's all Skibonas over there, which you can't quite see. You can see the blades, but you can't.
Yeah, we got to see those. Oh my gosh, those are just gorgeous. Look at those.
And that's a mixture, I think, of Darkwood, Denelli, Swordsmithy, Black Fencer,
Mm-hmm.
and that's at the top. There's a Cavetton Dussac, which is a copy of my original. But yeah, there's the suppliers. It's so much better than it used to be. You've got so much to choose from.
Yeah. Well, I differ a little bit, but this might just be because I have synthetics, right? So if I didn't have a synthetic, I'd be like, oh no, I think I want to get some synthetics. But I've kind of gone round and round. Now I recommend for new people just to get like a rattan stick, like a single stick, and go from there, and then just go straight to steel. But that's just because of my club. I have a bunch of synthetics that they can use, right? But I kind of like what you said, because if you don't have access to that, you're going to want to get your own synthetic. I mean, this is true because it's exactly what I would want because it looks like a sword. It has an edge, it has a flat, right? And so that's really important to understand.
That's also why you need to talk to your instructor, because the way we do things can't and won't be the same as you. We're in a different country, we have different suppliers and a different sort of approach as to how we do things. So Black Fencer is cheap and easy in the UK. Mm-hmm. It's not cheap and easy in the US, or certainly not as cheap and as easy. So it's not the same. So we do things differently. So definitely always talk to your instructors. I labour the points, but people don't, and it will save you so much hassle in the long run. We do make a big, quite extensive use of the foam swords now, not as a sort of a primary kind of not as a primary sort of weapon for everybody, but they're a really good thing to have in the bag. Somebody brand new turns up and they got nothing. You put a mask on their head, a foam sword in their hands, and they can fully participate in the class. Mm-hmm. And not being able to participate in a class really sucks. And if you turn up, you drill with everybody, and then you have to go and stand at the side and watch. Well, nobody turns up at fencing to stand and watch.
No. So
they've got to be able to participate. So like you saying with the rattan sticks, it's something that is affordable and doable. For us, the foam swords, it allows them to get fully involved. And in the first session, they can experience what it's like to fight, and it's stressful and exciting. And you've got somebody that wants to hit you, but also it's not like boxing where you're going to get hit. They're just going to make basically touch contact. So you don't have the worry of kind of the injury, but you do have the stress of somebody leaping around and you can't see the sword, and then suddenly it stabs you in the head. And then you're thinking, I want to hit them. And then the next thing you know, it's the end of the session. You're thinking, well, I'm already pumped now. I want to do that. So, for us, foams are really good. And also, if people are tired, if they want to strip down, they've just got their T-shirts and their trousers, put the mask on, last 10 minutes, they can just do some light sparring, completely stripped down, nice and cool, nice light weapon, and they can still get the exercise. And of course, they're not wearing all the gear now, so it's much more like a sort of one-on-one civilian fight.
Yeah.
Well, we really like them.
Very cool. You know what? That's some good advice. I know we've spent a lot of time on that, but for new people just getting into HEMA, excellent advice. Final words. Is there anything else that you got for us today?
Well, about HEMA or just in general?
Anything you want to talk about.
The last Mandalorian episode kind of was disappointing, but
I haven't seen it yet, so I did hear that it was disappointing. Yeah.
No spoilers. No, not really. In terms of if anybody wants to talk about sort of HEMA or writing or sci-fi or anything, just get online and find some people that are interested in the same kind of things and have a chat with them. I'm always happy to talk about those things.
Very cool.
So I know that sounds like an advert for where to find me, but yeah,
That's okay. We got show notes at the podcast, right? So
cool.
so we are going to have show notes, links. I mean, that's part of what we do. Guys, HEMA, the historical fencing community, is still pretty small, and we're a bunch of like-minded, people. We share certain interests and hobbies. I think it's important for us as a community to support each other, right? It just makes for a better community. And so, I'm just going to shamelessly say it. We got show notes with links. So if you're interested in reading some of Michael's books, you can certainly give it a go there. Obviously, there's the club, right? Academy of Historical Fencing that he and Nick run. I encourage you, if you're in the area, to check that out. I'm not ashamed to say it. It's important that we make sure that people understand what we offer, right?
Yeah, there's it's definitely, and also you look at all kind of the fencing stuff we do. There's, I don't know if that's never worked before.
Pizza's here.
Yeah. There's where was I? Completely lost my train of thoughts. In terms of there's all kinds of people that you've never even heard of or talked to before. You find them, and then they've got a whole new spin or idea on something you're interested in. So there might be a particular technique or something about a sword. Concentrate on the content, I'd say, is the number one thing. The things they're talking about. The people are complicated. And you just need to be interested in the bits that are relevant to you when it comes to HEMA. So if I find people that they've got stuff to talk about with swords or equipment or techniques, find them, talk to them about it. There's really good groups online, Facebook. There's loads and loads of groups on there. Just have a troll, have a look on YouTube, find people that sound like they know what they're talking about, and then talk to others. See if what they're talking about makes sense. Mm-hmm. And again, talk to your instructors. The instructors are a really good focal point. If you want to find YouTube channels, 16th century fencing, go and talk to instructors. They might tell you to go and check out I think it's Bjorn Ruther, who's got really, really good Maya channel. I drop him messages every now and then just to annoy him. But if you want to go and find out something, they'll point you in that direction. You'd never find out otherwise. So you've got to get out there and talk to people. And there's never been a better time. The amount of information out there, the amount of people out there, just be focused so you know what you're looking for, and just start talking to people.
Yeah. And, and thank you for that. I like you said, maybe it's just the American in me. Historical fencing is what it is, and it's wonderful, and it's different things to different people. But one thing that I want to see is more colloquial respect for what we do, and at least a sort of understanding that it even exists as its own thing. Right? Everyone knows what karate is. Everyone knows what jiu-jitsu is. Everyone knows what kendo is. Everyone knows what Olympic fencing is. Everyone needs to know what historic fencing is. And each culture has their own historical fencing. So it's not even about HEMA, it's not about historical European martial arts, right? That's just, as you said, the regional thing. That's not important. It's just the historical fencing is the most important thing. And in a very interesting way, it kind of grounds us to our past, but not in a weird way. What I'm trying to say is it gives us something to celebrate that was in all of our past, and it's something that grounds us and makes us feel good. It's something to do. It's something to accomplish. It's a challenge, and you might learn something you will learn something about yourself as you participate in this sort of activity, whether you call it a hobby or a sport or an activity, whatever you call it, right? If you take it seriously, you're going to learn something about yourself. You're going to learn something about others, and you're going to get into a community that is so enriching. You guys will have cool things to talk about, and I alluded to this in hey, I got a question for you. Are you hearing a weird feedback, or is that just me?
No, nothing here.
Okay, good. It's my headphones. I think I'm going to have to get a different pair. It's going...
No, it all sounds fine here.
Yeah. Okay. Good. Good. Maybe in the final it won't sound this way. But anyway, so what I'm trying to say is if you feel like you need something more in your life, might I suggest historical fencing, because along the way you're going to find some really interesting people, and you're going to have shared experiences with these interesting people. And I have this kind of this idea, right? And this isn't for everyone, but it's for people who voluntarily want to participate in this. The one way to forge a bond of friendship, a strong bond of friendship, is going through a shared difficult experience together. Whether it's like a camping trip, say, that's kind of low level discomfort, or an adventure, a full on adventure, right, where there's some setbacks and hardship, but in the end, ultimately, you discover something really interesting. Well, martial arts is kind of like that, and historical fencing is a lot like that. It doesn't matter how good you are, you're gonna get hit. And so there's a little bit of discomfort or even pain associated with that, and I'm not talking about injury, but as we experience that together, that's what bonds us. So that little bit, I'm just going to call it pain, that little bit of pain that everyone shares together, it binds us together. And I don't mean it in a weird way. I mean it like in it's just a shared experience. I don't know how else to put it. And it's like your buddies become your blood brothers, your blood brothers, I should say. I don't know if that's a little woo-woo out there, and I don't know if that's too much. And you don't even have to get into that to get into historical fencing, but along the way, it just sort of happens.
Well, yeah, and people will take it. It'll be more important to some people than others, but they'll go as deep as they as it takes them. So some people will turn up, they'll do their session, and maybe they won't think a huge amount about it till the next one. But there will still. It's
not about pain, right? It's not about that.
But you see people that when they start and they're finding it hard to breathe because they're stressed, not because they're not fit. Yeah. So just because they're not, their chest is tight, they're forgetting to breathe. They're really struggling. Maybe they're super fit and they can't handle it. They're getting walloped all over the place. And then you see 3 months later that they're sparring with kind of your regulars and they're holding their own. And you can see they are transformed. The way they stand, instead of sort of slouched, you can see them more upright. They're more confident. Even the way they speak, it's almost like police academy sort of. I forget the lady's name, but the lady that's really quiet.
Yeah, you're talking the movie.
Yeah. It's that bit too old. But you'll see people, they'll become a little more assertive just because they're relaxed, they're feeling a little bit more competent around basically their friends that they've made. And I see lots of people, and it might even take them a year, but they do come out of their shells because they've got one, even if there's nothing else they've got in common, if they maybe disagree about everything. But the minute they turn out to fencing, they're all doing. They all like fencing, and they've got better, and they can fight somebody, and they can hold them to a certain standard. And yeah, they look different, and they treat each other differently as well, which is excellent.
Very good. All right, I think we're gonna stop there, ladies and gentlemen. Michael Thomas, thank you so much for your time. I'd like to have you back on the show some other time if you're willing.
Of course.
Wonderful. And so I'm just signing off here, guys. Remember to slay your demons, and we'll catch you on the next show. Make sure you take a look at the show notes if there's something that is interesting for you. And have a nice one.
Thanks for having me.